We were doing this suboccipital triangle. So suboccipital triangle is formed from the norma occipitalis, the back side, the bone, and the all 7 cervical vertebrae, they forming the neck part. And this is the norma verticalis, norma occipitalis with the mastoid process. Behind the ear is the end of the skull, that is the level of foramen magnum. This was the sagittal suture leading to the formation of lambdoid suture. And this triangular bone which is in between is the occipital bone. And here comes the asterion, joining of the parietal, occipital and temporal bone. This point is the asterion. And here lies the external occipital protuberance, where 4 structures are attached. 4 structures are attached to the external occipital protuberance. You should know how to mark the 4 structures on this. Then there is the external occipital crest. From the middle of it, the inferior nuchal line ends at the skull. Above and parallel to the superior nuchal line is the highest nuchal line, which also ends at the mastoid process. So this was, we have done the norma occipitalis, and we have done the bones. The first bone which articulates with the foramen magnum with the kidney-shaped articular facet on either side of the foramen magnum, kidney-shaped and convex, and it is received by concave articular facet of atlas. So this forms the joint between the skull or the occipital bone with the atlas. This is called the Atlanto occipital joint. And because of the concavity and convexity, so anterior-posterior movement is possible. So this is the what we are seeing from the back side. So what we are seeing, posterior arc of the atlas, and laterally there is a tip of the transverse process. This is the posterior tubercle of the. So this is C1 vertebra, how we show with the Atlanto-occipital joint formation. Then below here is the convex inferior articular facet of the atlas, convex, and it is received by concave oval articular facet of second vertebra, that is called C2, that is the axis vertebra, with the example of pivot joint. In the pivot joint, what happens? One bone remains stationary and other moves around it. So odontoid process of the dens of the axis remains stationary, and around which the atlas moves, and atlas is connected to the foramen magnum, and foramen magnum is connected to the skull. So whole of the skull moves like this. So here dens is stationary and skull is moving along with the atlas like this. So that is why it is called the pivot. Pivot means one thing is fixed and other is moving around it. Same is our radius bone is there. Lower end of the humerus and upper end of the radius, it articulates, but the humerus remains stationary and the head of the radius moves in supination and pronation. So this is also the example of the pivot variety of the synovial joint. So why it is called axis? Because dens remains vertical in position and is fixed like the axis. So this is the vertical axis around which the atlas is moving. So that's why the second vertebra name is the axis. And why the first vertebra cervical is called atlas? Who is Atlas? Dictionary meaning of Atlas. Who was Atlas? The person? Atlas. Nowadays you are not using the cycles, but there was a very popular brand of the cycle, you must be knowing, Atlas. Nowadays it is there or vanished? Cycle, have you cycle in your childhood? Was there a band of Atlas? That was good. So what you see the emblem on the cycle? Whose brand is Atlas? Boys side? No GK, no general knowledge of medical student. Nil. So Atlas was a person who was holding the earth on his shoulder. You know it or no? Who know? Raise your hand. Only 2 people. So, whole of the earth he is holding on the shoulder of a person who is labeled as, whose name was Atlas. He was so bodybuilder type. If you see the picture, today you go to your Google and see who is Atlas. So this should be your quest. The Atlas word is new for you, you should go for Google at once, within a second. And you will see that picture of that man holding the earth, whole of the earth on the shoulder. So Atlas is a bone. Have you seen? With the anterior or posterior, it is very feeble or very weak bone if you see it. Have you seen? Everybody is having Atlas. Skeleton hai ghar mein. So Atlas is a very thin vertebra. Anterior or posterior or transverse process is very fragile. But what is the surprise? That Atlas is holding whole of the skull and head and neck along with the brain and CSF. Same in the Atlas, person who was holding the shoulder. So heavy thing on a shoulder, here is also heavy thing on the Atlas. So that's why we named it. And why we named axis? Stationary. As if there is a anchor, the horse is there, and horse is having the rope in the neck, and other end of the rope is in the center of the ground, and horse is running only with the circle, 1, 2, 3 circle, he is running. So this is the example of pivot joint. The center is fixed and horse is moving in a fixed circle. So that is how you have to exemplify why it is in second vertebra named as the axis vertebra. So this is the axis vertebra. And another thing, the spine is bifid. So this is C1, this is C2, then C3, C4, C5, C6, and last vertebra is C7. So this is how you have to make the diagram. C1, C2, C3, C4, this is C5, C6, C7, and C7 vertebra is, what is the other name of the C7 vertebra? Anybody? What is the other name of the C7 vertebra? Special. No doubt it is a typical vertebra, but what is specialty of the C7 you must be knowing. I think you have not done the bones. Because you don't purchase the skeleton, that is the problem. So I have said, who is not carrying the skeleton will be failed in the practical exam. Because everybody will be asked about the bones, skull. We will ask each and every vertebra. You have to handle it in the anatomy position. You have to mark the all suboccipital muscles, origin, insertion of all mandible. 7 nerve touching the mandible, you must be know. How you differentiate between the male and the female mandible. So these are should be on your fingertips. And it is only possible when you are having the bones on your table, every study table, every day. That you are numb, you don't know anything. Sorry. So C7 is called vertebra prominens. Its name is vertebra prominens. Why it is called? Because its spine is the longest. Spine of the C7 vertebra is the longest. If you see the lateral view of the skull, foramen magnum, this is the atlas vertebra, C1, C2, only having the dents. This is the dents, how you show the dents. This is the anterior arc of the atlas and articulating with the dents. This is from the Atlanto axial joint. Then the curvature, the cervical lordosis, C1, C2, C3 vertebra. Then C4, C5, C6, C7. And this is the sagittal section of the head and neck. This is the posterior arc of the atlas. This is the bifid spine of the axis. And this is the vertebral or spinal canal, which contains spinal cord. This is the sagittal section. So all the vertebrae have got the bifid spine. And C7, spine of the C7 is the longest. That's why it's called the vertebra prominence. So if you put your finger and touch your external occipital protuberance, come down in the middle, do everything, everybody, touch your external occipital protuberance, see the, have you find? Prominent, very prominent. Bring in the mid of the finger downward, mid, down, 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 mid, you reach here. Is there prominence, is there something? Bone is raised here, you are touching this spine, tip of the spine of C7 is this. Is it clear? So this is how to study the anatomy. It is your own body. So this is vertebra prominence. You are touching the tip of the transverse, this spinous or the spinous process of C7 vertebra. So that is the number one specialty. That is, it has got the longest spine of all cervical vertebrae. Number two, this vertebra is, this spine, tip of the spine is used for counting the vertebra up and down. This is a very important landmark in counting the vertebra up and down. Just go above this tip in the middle. Any spine you feel, what will be the number? C6. Then go up. This is C5, then 4, then 3. So go up. So counting the tip. And from this vertebral prominence, go down. Any tip you find below this will be, after C7 what start? T1 vertebra. First thoracic spine. So this is thoracic vertebra, now they start. C7, this is T1. And all the thoracic vertebra, they have got the long spines. This is a feature of the thoracic vertebra. So features start just from the C7. So long spine is the feature of thoracic vertebra. Only C7 is the last vertebra, it follows the thoracic type of. And its body is also, body of the vertebra is also somewhat like the thoracic. Size of the thoracic, size of the cervical vertebra, body is increasing as you go down. As you go up, it becomes small, small, small. And in the C1, it is diminished. Body is absent, only arc is present, like anterior and the posterior arc. So this is how you should know all these cervical vertebra, because this is your in syllabus. No thoracic, no lumbar or sacrum we will ask you, only we will ask you each and every vertebra of the cervical region, mandible and skull. So BDS students should do on the fingertips these 3 bones at least. So this is how. Another feature of cervical vertebra is the foramen. Foramen. What is the name I am making? Foramen transversarium. Because it is present in the transfer process, so its name is transversarium. So through what passes through this? Vertebral artery. Except C7. So here instead of the artery, what passes? Vertebral vein that you have to remember. So this is the vertebral artery going up, and this is the same vertebral artery that we have studied in the blood supply of brain, circle of Willis, if you remember that diagram. The two vertebral arteries, right and left, they unite to form which artery? Brain. Which artery it forms? On the pons. Which artery formed in the pons? You remember this diagram? This should be your flow. Within a fraction of a second you have to draw, because this is the anatomy, is the subject of artist. Who is not artist will fail. And this comes only because of practice, repetition. 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, 100 times. You will be also like me. You can also draw it. Anybody can draw it. You take more time, I take less time, because I have got to practice. I am not God gift something. I was like you when I was first year student. So anatomy is the subject of repetition, revision. Again and again you have to make the diagram, rub it, make it diagram, rub it. Then you will be following. Because I have told 100 times that only diagrams is required in the anatomy answers of your theory. So, out of this is the vertebral artery. This is the internal carotid artery. So, internal carotid artery and vertebral artery, there is a anastomosis between it. So, two arteries, they supply the brain. Two from the front, going from the anterior triangle through carotid sheaths, and two enter the foramen magnum to supply the brain from cervical vertebra. So a special hole has made, God has made this special hole in the transfer process of all cervical vertebra, not in the lumbar vertebra, not in the thoracic vertebra, only in the cervical vertebra, for the safe passage of the vertebral artery into the brain to form the circle of Willis and supply the whole of this forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. So this is the engineering, the safe passage. When something passes through the bone, nobody can press your neck from behind like this. He can press the muscles, but he cannot press the artery. This is the logic. Why God has passed and why God has created foramen transverse area. So when you study the anatomy, your eyes get widely open. That who is the architect? Who is the engineer who has thought about this? Because brain is the essential organ of the body. We can revive the heart by injecting adrenaline and noradrenaline. Injections are available in the market. If lung stops, we have got the ventilator to give the artificial respiration oxygen. But once a brain is dead, there is no any science is there to revive it. So this is the architect. Safe passage of the blood, arterial blood to the brain. The neck can be damaged or cut by the knife. But still patient survives, brain survives, because blood is coming from backside. So this is called, such a circulation is called collateral circulation. Again given in your general anatomy, if you have heard. What are end arteries? What is AV anastomosis? What is collateral circulation? Everything is given in a very small book. That is the starting book of your first 10 days of your entry into the medical college or dental college, that you have not done yet. After 1 year is wasted. So again and again I am saying, go today, tomorrow is a Sunday, finish that small book of general anatomy, general anatomy, general anatomy. Then you will study, understand everything about the minor and major things of the anatomy. So this is the safe passage. So artery is going up to supply, and what is coming out? Where the artery is there, what is coming? Venous plexus around it. Veins is coming out. Vein is bringing the venous blood downward, arterial blood is going upward. And when all the veins they reach the C6 vertebral foramen transversus, they are able to form a thick vein, which is called vertebral vein, which passes through the C7 vertebra, and this is the venous drainage of the brain. Wherever the artery is going to supply the brain, from the same areas, what is coming? Small veins. And when they reach at the level of C6, they form a thick vein that is called vertebral vein, which has to pass through the foramen transversarium of C7. So that is the difference. Why all other they are having no, but it is having the C7. So this should be your knowledge, and how to make this full, you make this full page diagram, this one. Then it will be clear. I don't make small diagram like the Chaurasia. Full page diagram, and same, why I am making big? So that you should also make big. You should also have got the practice, same in the exams also. Full page diagram will give the more marks, because it will be crystal clear, easy to digest by the examiner. Small one, it will wastage of the time of the examiner. He will be irritated by small diagrams. It should be big and clear. So this is all about the vertebra and foramen transversae. Another thing is all these cervical vertebrae, they all remain straight. Or in other words, whole of our vertebral column remains straight. Our neck remains straight below the skull because of a very strong ligament of the neck attached to the external occipital protuberance. Then it is attached to the external occipital crest, is made for this ligament. Then it is attached to the posterior tubercle of atlas. Then it is attached to the bifid spines of all cervical vertebra, and last this ligament is attached to the vertebra prominence spine, the C7. So this is in the lateral view, this is the external occipital protuberance, this crest, and this is the ligament of the neck. And what is the name of this? Ligamentum nuchae. Nuchae means neck. Ligamentum nuchae is the name of this ligament. This is ligamentum nuchae. So it is keeping the skull in line with the cervical vertebra. That is the function. Plus it also gives the origin of the various muscles. So neck has to be straight all the time, because we know very important thing is passing through this. Brain is continued with the spinal cord, and spinal cord is lying in the spinal or the central canal here. So spinal cord has to remain straight. And spinal cord is attached with how many pairs of the spinal nerves? 31. And C1 arises from the above the C1 vertebra. then C2, then C3, then C4, C5, C6, C7, C8. So they lie above the 8 cervicals, vent, spinal, cervical nerve, they are arising from the above the vertebra. Now we know the brain, which is present in the skull, is continuous with the midbrain, bones and medulla, and this is cerebellum. So brain is continuous with the spinal cord because both are part of CNS. Central nervous system is present in the center of the human body, in the skull and the vertebral column. The brain and spinal cord, they are part of central nervous system. So brain you have done, and it is continued with the spinal cord, which is also called spinal medulla. So this is the brain is continuous. And which is the lowest part of the brain? Medulla oblongata. And where the brain ends? What is the vertebral level of the brain? Where the brain ends? Where the brain ends? At the upper border of the atlas. Underline it. Upper border of the cervical, first cervical vertebra, atlas. Upper border is the end of the brain or medulla, and this is also, in other words, you can say the start of spinal cord. So spinal cord starts from upper border of the atlas, where the brain ends, because both are in continuity. So here the brain is continuous with the spinal cord, and there is a gap between the occipital bone of the skull or atlas or the foramen magnum and upper border of the atlas. There is a gap. So anybody can damage the spinal cord here or brain here, because above this brain is protected by the skull cranial cavity, and below here the spinal cord is protected by the bones of the vertebral column, but the gap between the two is the gap. So what happens here? This gap between the foramen magnum and atlas is closed by a membrane which is called Atlanto-occipital membrane. Atlanto-occipital membrane. This gap has to be closed, otherwise anybody can put the finger and damage it. So there should be no leakage of the CSF or meninges. So whatever meninges covering the pia mater, arachnoid and the dura mater of the brain, same meninges are continued on the spinal cord as well. So this membrane, what you will name it? Atlanto-occipital membrane. And this membrane is incomplete. Why incomplete? Because this vertebral artery which is coming from the neck, it has to go inside the skull to supply the brain. So if this artery, this membrane is circumferential, it is attached to the upper border of the atlas, anterior arc as well as the posterior arc. So this is called, when something is attached like the circle, it is called circumferential in the anatomy. Circumferential means all around. The foramen magnum above and below is the upper border of the atlas. But the vertebral artery, when it takes origin, it takes origin from the subclavian artery, first part. Then we call the first part. Then when it enters through the foramen transverse system, the C6, now it ascends in the foramen transverse system. This is called the second part of the vertebral artery. Now here it comes on the atlas. Now the vertebra ends. Now this artery which was vertical, now it becomes horizontal, because it has to go inside the skull. Through foramen magnum it has to enter, then it has to enter. Now it runs horizontally. When it goes from vertical to horizontal, now it is called the third part of the vertebral artery. This is the third part. And there is a definite groove is present on the posterior arc of the atlas. If you have studied the atlas, you must be knowing this groove for the artery, to support the artery. There is a smooth groove is there, because artery has to come and then it has to run horizontally. So there is a groove is present on the posterior superior surface of the posterior arc. Then this artery, there is already a hole is waiting, a hole in the Atlanto occipital membrane is waiting for the artery. That's why we say this membrane is not complete. It is not closed. It has got a hole posteriorly for the safe passage of the vertebral artery to enter into the foramen magnum to form the circle of Willis. So this artery, the third part of the vertebral artery is horizontal, and it will enter into the hole in the Atlanto-occipital membrane, which is an incomplete membrane because of the vertebral artery. And then from here, then artery again becomes vertical in the foramen magnum. This is the vertical part. It becomes vertical. Vertical now. Now it is called fourth part. So you should know what is first part, second part, third part and fourth part of vertebral artery. As you know, the maxillary artery also has got the first part, second part and third part of maxillary artery, and every part of maxillary artery is different branches. So same is the vertebral artery. First part, second part, third part, it should be clear to everybody. So now this is how they enter. Rest we do in the 12 o'clock next class.